All right. Well, hello and welcome to the second installment of the Interlaced webinar series focused on strategies to help you scale your startup. I'm Mallory Randall, and with me today, I have our Vice President of Growth, Jack Segar, who will be who's going to be talking to us about scaling your team through the development of an IT strategy. So before we get started today, I just want to go over a few quick housekeeping items. We welcome and encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. So if you have one as we go, please make sure to pop that into the question and answer field, and we'll make sure to cover as many as we can towards the end. Just a quick reminder that the session today is being recorded, and both the recording as well as the slide deck will be made available to you, and we'll get that emailed out either later today or first thing tomorrow. And then last thing, if you enjoyed this webinar, please make sure to register for our next webinar, which is going to be on Wednesday, October 16th, where we're going to be covering strategies to scale your startup through some security best practices. We'll make sure to include the registration link along with the recording afterwards. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to Jack. Jack, the show is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mallory. Let me go ahead and share my screen. We could dive right in. All right. Amazing. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you all today and touch on the importance of developing IT strategy for your growing organization. As Mallory mentioned, my name is Jack Segar. I serve as the Vice President of Growth here at Interlace, and I've had the pleasure of working at Interlace for the past 7 years, supporting hundreds of clients, which will largely inform the topics that we'll be touching on today's webinar. As she also mentioned, please feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the chat. Mallory and the team will be monitoring these throughout the presentation, and we'll aim to address them towards the end of the presentation. I don't fully anticipate us needing to use the full hour we have allocated today, so I hope to be able to return sometime in the event that we move through the presentation quickly and address all the follow-up questions. But with that, we can go ahead and dive right in. So as to the agenda today, I'll share a bit about Interlaced, who we are and who we serve, at which point I'll launch into the core topic at hand, which is the challenges impacting growing startups at different inflection points. Throughout the presentation, we're going to touch on IT strategy for startups, building IT foundations for startups, IT strategy to manage shadow IT, business drivers for IT security compliance, and then separation of IT duties. With that, we'll go ahead and launch right into who we are. So simply put, Interlaced is a team of startup IT experts that specialize in developing IT programs and technology stacks that enable our clients to grow with ease. Interlaced was founded just over 15 years ago as a small startup ourselves, and we've grown to the point in which we're currently supporting several hundred organizations across the United States, with our home base being in San Diego, California, and Nashville, Tennessee. The content that we're going to be chatting through today is a direct result of the insights we've been able to garner through the support that we provided 1,000+ organizations over the years. So I hope this information will be helpful for you, regardless of the current stage that your business is at. Great. So we're going to jump right in and we're going to kick off. So starting with the different startup IT inflection points that our different businesses face. Starting with IT strategy for startups. In the early stages, generally between 1 and 10 employees, most teams are scrappily doing what they need to survive, and process and strategy often give way to experimentation and constant shifting priorities. While there is likely not a very well-developed IT strategy at this stage, and rightfully so, there are some common trends that you should really consider when you're kicking off your operations and getting started. First, many, if not all the devices are going to be personally owned, or what is known as BYOD, which really stands for bring your own device. While BYOD is a super convenient option to get things off the ground, it can present some security concerns that will be an important consideration in the next stage of a business's growth. Additionally, businesses are often very reliant on outside support through contractors, advisors, and freelancers. While contractors are a great way to pull in experts and advisors early on, most of the time, these engagements are going to be temporary, which will add to the overhead of needing to constantly turn access for systems on and off for those seasonal resources. The last challenge in this category that we want to highlight is, in most cases, one or multiple people are acting as IT administrators, holding all the keys to company systems in somewhat of a disparate fashion. It's also common for team members to turn to the individual who's most technical at this stage for any sort of IT challenges they encounter, really largely making that individual de facto IT. I'm sure a lot of you have been in situations where you don't exactly know who to turn to for help, and you shoot your friend a note who happens to be able to solve most of the technical issues. That is a very common challenge that we tend to see at this stage. And the intent is, well, hey, we're a startup. We're working together to make sure that we're able to achieve our goal and, be able to develop a proof of concept and go to market. And that's totally okay. But it is going to be a challenge that we're going to continue to consider throughout the different stages of the business's growth. Speaking to some solutions to help combat these challenges, first, we recommend creating a record or matrix of who has access to what systems, folders, and groups. This will make it easier to cut access when someone leaves the company or when a contractor rolls off a project. This will also act as a great building block for establishing employee on and offboarding checklists, which down the road will ultimately streamline the provisioning and deprovisioning process. Second, consider adding a second administrator for key systems. This will ensure that the company is not stuck in a lurch in the event that a key individual is suddenly unavailable. Third, using a simple password manager like 1Password, LastPass, or Keeper as some options is a great way to secure access to your most sensitive passwords. And this is a great example of empowering your team with the appropriate tools early on to establish a strong cybersecurity hygiene. Lastly, consider asking your employees and contractors to enable data encryption on their personal device using FileVault if they're on Mac or BitLocker if they're using a PC. And in the event that someone leaves their laptop at a coffee shop or maybe it gets stolen, this will give you the peace of mind that business data is secure, effectively making that device a very expensive paperweight. Down the road, you'll be able to rely on solutions to enforce device encryption at a global level. This is merely a stopgap solution while your team is leveraging their own devices. Moving into the next category, which we've coined building IT foundations for startups. For teams between 11 and 30 employees, most decisions happen by committee or by consensus. Roles are becoming a bit more defined and employees know who to go to for help. Even without clear structure and accountability, things are getting done and moving forward. During this phase, the need for an IT foundation becomes evident. So first off, the first challenge we're going to look at is lack of structure. So the importance of structure, process, and communication really begin to emerge as the team is now operating out of an ever-growing application stack. You've aligned on a set of core solutions that you're using to drive the business forward on a day-to-day basis. Now would really be a good time to expand upon that systems matrix that we chatted through on the last slide by outlining system owners to ensure that the team knows what systems are in place and who to go to in the event that they need support. And that could really be felt when there's not an internal owner. The best thing that you can do is to establish those system owners. So until you actually have that IT guy or that IT team or that IT partner, it's really important that the team knows who to turn to in the event that they're locked out of a system, or maybe something a bit more complex where they need a bit more hands-on support from an additional team member who has a bit more of a grip on that specific software solution. The other important consideration, again, building on the topic from the last slide, is to start to transition from BYOD to company-owned devices and to deploy a mobile device management solution, often referred to as an MDM solution, as a best practice. This ensures that company devices can be locked and wiped if lost or stolen, protecting that company data, in addition to enabling businesses to enforce device and security policies and manage software updates globally. As to the solutions that you can employ at this stage, first off, we would recommend that businesses consider deploying a business-grade antivirus solution to secure their devices and mitigate most low-hanging threats. While this might not seem like a high-impact solution, the endpoint security solution that Interlace deploys across all of our clients' environments and endpoints identify and remediate thousands of threats daily. So it's definitely worthwhile to consider bringing one of these solutions on board. Secondly, employees should have a way of backing up their devices on the cloud to promote redundancy. So in the event that data is lost, you have a streamlined path of recovering that data in no time. For those hoping to make the most out of your productivity suite, such as Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, you can lean into the cloud sync applications available within both of these solutions to back up local data to Google Drive, SharePoint, or OneDrive, respectively. This is also a good time to solve for the largest breach vector by volume, which is email. Given the human factor of email, businesses rely on their team to confidently identify an email when it's suspicious and take action accordingly, which is quite a lot of pressure to put on your team. The best way to solve for this threat vector is by conducting security awareness training that focuses on email, or by implementing an email security solution like Iron Scales or Barracuda, which are very common in the space. Finally, during this phase, it's important to begin working with an IT professional, as the scope and the amount of work attached to managing IT as a secondary or tertiary function of your role will often become a little bit too much to handle on top of your day-to-day responsibilities. So it's important to make this decision early, even if this is a temporary engagement, to point you in the right direction, ensure you're opting for the most appropriate tools that will help your business scale, and to just get a grip on the best practices that you should put in place when it comes to cybersecurity. In the event that you would like to perform a deeper dive on any of these topics, Interlace has several free resources available on our website and blog to help you through the process of implementing on some of these strategies. So that could be a helpful resource down the road. Great. Moving into the next phase, which is IT strategy to manage shadow IT, which might be an unfamiliar term. So let me demystify that for you. When a team enters the next stage of growth, generally this is going to be between 31 and 50 employees. The need for a management layer emerges, and the additional need for process, policies, and organizational strategy becomes more important than ever. So as to the challenges that are typically being faced at this inflection point, first we have what we refer to as application sprawl. So the complexity and number of applications and tools being used will likely begin to increase dramatically, both on an individual and organization level, creating what we commonly refer to as application sprawl. When your business and organization has brought on dozens of software solutions to solve everyday business challenges, it becomes difficult for employees to understand all that they have access to, often prompting them to seek out softwares to solve their issues independently. And it's at this stage in a business's growth when shadow IT tends to emerge. What's very common is organizations will have a standard set of applications that they use across the board, and it's clearly utilized, and the organization has great insight into those solutions. But then you have different functions and departments starting to crop up. And since you're a startup, there's likely solutions that they're evaluating that have yet to be considered as part of your application stack. So it's really important, and we'll chat on this in just a second, but it's really important that we don't want to prevent the team from utilizing the resources that they need to drive a better business outcome for the work that they're focusing on. But you also want to make sure that there are checks and balances in place. So that's really the balance that we're striving for with these types of recommendations. So speaking of shadow IT is when an individual or departments make decisions to use hardware and software without the knowledge or consultation of the greater team. So this could be anything from servers and laptops to cloud services and SaaS platforms. Most commonly, the easiest one to adopt is going to be SaaS platform and software solutions. Nowadays, if you use Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, in one click, you can sign up for a service using your Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 identity. It makes it really easy to just set up a new service and call it a day. The challenge is, again, it's the foresight and general awareness of the greater team as to the different solutions that business data is starting to be stored in. So if not carefully managed, creating these data silos where, hey, we have these contents in Dropbox, and then we have our internal files in Google Drive. It really can create a challenge to where, there's a security concern that can be presented. You're having data stored in different locations. You suddenly need to secure access to multiple different softwares. But it also can cause license counts and the associated license costs to soar. So this often will lead to a fractured understanding as to where business data is being stored and where dollars are being spent on your technology. As to some of the common solutions that you can employ at this stage, the first one that we're going to chat through is incorporating security standards. And the example we have here is CIS and cyber insurance. So with most businesses requiring more stringent security requirements of their vendors and partners, teams at this phase should really consider incorporating security standards like CIS, which stands for the Center of Internet Security, which is an independent organization that has developed a security framework that is designed to help businesses protect themselves from pervasive cyber threats. So for those of you that don't have a formal cybersecurity requirement, this is a really great framework to orient around to identify what those best practices are and start to implement against or chip away at those slowly. It can also be a great idea to procure cyber insurance at this stage to start protecting your business and valuable assets. This way, your team's already prepared to start winning business in a world of ever-evolving cyber threats. And nowadays, especially if you're in a B2B vertical and you're serving other businesses, and particularly those in the mid-market or enterprise, you're going to be sure to get presented with a list of security requirements that you need to fulfill in order for them to feel comfortable with you processing any sort of data, whether it's sensitive or not. The next recommendation here will be a SaaS license management solution. So I spoke earlier about application sprawl and really getting a grip on the solutions that you have in place. There's also the awareness piece, which is making sure that your team understands the solutions they have access to. And so a SaaS license management solution is going to be a great next step to ensure that you're promoting that visibility and transparency. So during this phase, it's important to implement tools, processes, and procedures for SaaS licenses and access level management across all technology touchpoints. Ideally, you're creating a logical permissions matrix that will ensure that your team has access to the content that they need for their role and only that access, but also to ensure that you're not paying for licensing that they don't actually need access to. And the last piece here is a standardized procurement process. So a standardized procurement process is super helpful to understand how you should be procuring computers, peripherals, applications, as it creates a common baseline with a predictable expense. So this will become really important as you hit that inflection point where you're starting to hire. Maybe you've secured rounds of funding and it's time to grow the business, develop your product, and start to sell. And these situations can be really important for you to understand the overall cost associated with not only bringing an employee on board, but the cost for all the licensing and services that you're going to be providing for them to be able to do their day-to-day role. So not only will it help you plan with your forecast and budget accordingly, but it will also help your team evaluate the gaps in your software stack as maybe you're rolling out a new role for the first time, and they're going to need unique software to be able to deliver on that. All right, amazing. The next category here is going to be business drivers for IT security and compliance. So we've been chatting through IT security. We briefly touched on a compliance framework in the last slide. Around this stage, typically around 50 employees through 80 teams, subcultures, and departments have formed, and it's becoming really difficult to enforce and standardize around policies. So the need to develop functional expertise and specialization really becomes a reality at this stage, and it's important to stay ahead of the curve. Some of the challenges that we often see at this stage are going to be regulatory and client security requirements. So if you haven't heard it before, this inflection point, you certainly will begin to. But you're going to start to get pressure from clients, regulators, and investors to implement formal IT security and implement compliance requirements. Quite often, this could be done or conducted in the form of IT questionnaires, which can often be alarming the first time you receive one, as it's usually the first time that businesses are being formally asked about their IT security. which can be quite daunting and will likely illuminate some gaps as to how you're safeguarding business data. This is a great time to implement what is commonly referred to as a governance, risk, and compliance solution, otherwise known as a GRC solution, to start to document the device and security policies that have been implemented thus far. This will come in handy later if you end up pursuing formal compliance down the road, but will certainly be helpful for minimum insurance requirements when they're going to ask for an overview as to your IT posture and policies. As to some of the solutions that we would implore businesses consider at this stage, first off, it's really important to seek out IT and security professionals to help formulate your approach and enable your team to confidently respond to regulatory and client security requirements, which will ultimately give your partners confidence in your business operations. So you want to be able to turn this around quickly. And in many cases, this is going to be a touch point that will be temporary at first, but will likely become a bit more consistent throughout the business's operation. Most audit frameworks have annual renewal cycles. So a lot of these partnerships that you're going to be embarking on will have, an ongoing maintenance element to them, but will really be focused heavily on the annual audit period and ensuring that you make it through that stage without a issue. So working with a modern technology services provider or a managed security services provider, we're the king of acronyms, so otherwise known as MSSPs, can help to proactively build that foundation of IT security, making it much easier to prepare for common security frameworks such as SOC 2, NIST, CMMC, CIS, or HIPAA. There are dozens of cybersecurity frameworks out there. These are some of the ones that we commonly are confronted with, given the type of organizations that we tend to support. But while every business may not need to align with a compliance framework, there are several industries and verticals that are not regulated in this degree. It still can be a good idea to use these frameworks as a reference point to ensure your organization is abiding by best practices. So again, building on the CIS example from the last slide, while CIS is not really going to be a prescriptive framework that will ever really be a demand coming down from industry or client requirements, it is a really great baseline to establish with and has some notoriety attached to it. So you can comfortably say to any sort of prospects or clients that, hey, we align with the CIS framework. Not only does that establish a level of maturity with your cybersecurity posture, but it is something tangible that they can evaluate and look to when they're making a decision as to if they want to partner with you and trust you with their data. Great. Moving into the next category, which is separation of IT duties. Generally, we're going to see this around the 80 to 200 employee mark. And this is where the need for employee productivity, the need for redundancy, efficiency, and process are super critical. So some of the challenges that we tend to see at this stage is companies tend to grow very quickly after raising capital and need to onboard and equip and train their employees rapidly. And so efficiency becomes a huge consideration. In many cases, organizations today are operating fully remote or lean into a hybrid workflow to promote that flexibility. And while that's great, and there's a ton of cultural benefits to it, and if it works for some businesses, that's awesome. It's certainly a nice hiring perk. It can create a ton of logistical hurdles for HR and operations teams to accommodate for. More specifically, what I'm chatting through here is in a traditional sense, you onboard an employee, they come into the office for their first day, you've had the opportunity to set up their device, and it's ready to go for them when they sit down and go through their onboarding process. In a remote or hybrid world, it's not quite as simple. You need to account for logistics associated with getting it to them on their start date. With that, you don't want to hamper their first day experience. So not only should it still be a great first day experience where they have everything they need to be successful on that first day, but you also need to consider, well, hey, what does their home workstation look like? You might provide some peripherals, a desktop, monitor, keyboard, and that's going to be really important. So as we chat through efficiency, those are going to be some of the considerations here, is figuring out How do you improve upon your process while still enabling your team to have that flexibility and enable your team to provide a bit more of a workflow that isn't necessarily dependent on a team member coming into the office for that first day? So speaking of rapid onboarding, each week, multiple new team members are going to be starting. Computers need to be replaced. New policies and tools are deployed. It becomes a lot to manage. In addition to that, for organizations that are growing through inorganic growth ventures by way of acquisition or mergers, you're going to be confronted with a lot of difficult decisions around integrating different solutions, migrating them into each other, and creating a common source of truth. So the workload and breadth of work are really going to be difficult for an individual to stakehold or even a small team for some businesses. So it's important to think about how can we help augment or how can we help round out our team to ensure that we're not hampering any of our team members from being productive and having the resources that they need to be successful. So jumping into the solutions. First off, separating IT support from strategic planning. So during this phase, it becomes really important to start to separate day-to-day IT duties, which are largely going to be oriented around supporting the internal customers, your team, and the strategic IT planning and security initiatives. Oftentimes, it's really difficult to wear both of those hats, flexing from supporting John for marketing with his device issue to having to map out our approach towards security and meeting those ever-growing compliance requirements. As such, many businesses will typically hire an IT director to stakehold this internally and enforce the separation of duties in an attempt to alleviate some of the constraints being felt by an IT team. And commonly, businesses at this size and scale will look to supplement their internal IT resources with skilled technology services partners like Interlaced for certain support and programmatic expertise. So realistically, what we tend to see at this stage is businesses will often come to us with a very specific list of responsibilities that they would like to offload. In many cases, that could be employee on and offboarding. As we mentioned just a moment ago, it's really difficult to account for this and build out a scalable on and offboarding strategy to meet all of the demands and do so with your internal resources. Suddenly they're having to drop off a bunch of devices at FedEx. In a remote world, they might even be warehousing 10 to 15 laptops in their closet, which just poses a great risk to the business. So it is really important to be able to offload that and supplement your IT team with strategic partners. And that's where Interlaced and other MSPs across the nation come into play. Great. So now that we've discussed the challenges that most businesses face at different inflection points of their growth, let's focus on developing a strategy to actually overcome these obstacles and shift into a proactive mindset that enables your technology to propel your growth. So again, we've touched on this several times, but oftentimes, given the vast selection of IT tools, the need to implement formal IT processes and procedures, and the constant demand to serve your internal team and client alike, there is no shortage of ways to spend time or money while building your IT strategy. So that's where some spending inefficiencies tend to come into play. Again, one of the solutions that we'd recommend to combat this issue is with a SaaS licensing management solution or a SaaS asset inventory that will enable your team to understand where are we spending money and how can we optimize that accordingly. At this stage, it can also be helpful to evaluate your existing software stack. There are likely several solutions that are redundant and unnecessary at this stage. So it's important to evaluate that stack, determine, hey, can we actually fulfill this requirement in one of the solutions that we're already paying for? And if so, making those changes to drive adoption into the solutions that you want to orient around to ensure that your team feels like they still have access to all the solutions they need and feel supported. And the last piece is lack of proactive planning. So an IT roadmap can be an essential tool to solve for this issue, as it addresses the common challenge of mapping out the myriad of IT tools and potential inefficiencies in IT spending, and actually being strategic around where we want to invest, and the challenges that we need to overcome over the next 6, 12, and 18 months. So ultimately, from a solutions perspective, we would recommend to engage with experts early. That being IT consultants and professionals who have experience designing and supporting an IT program. These experts can bring with them that expertise and external perspective that can help streamline your IT strategy. And this will ultimately just ensure that you're investing in technology that not only meets your current needs, but is scalable for future demands. And that's why, again, I recommend that look forward of building out a technology strategy at least 18 months in the future. Additionally, ensuring that your team has the necessary tools to work efficiently while protecting business data is crucial. It not only refers to the physical devices, but also the right software solutions and cybersecurity measures to protect your business and the assets as your data and enterprise grows. Lastly, what's equally as important as developing an IT strategy is the execution of the strategy. Planning ahead and budgeting for these challenges, you can prevent these initiatives from falling to the wayside, which is a common issue for growing businesses that do not anticipate the increased complexity of their IT needs. In summary, a strategic IT roadmap is not just a plan for technology. It is a blueprint for sustainable growth, and it ensures your IT strategy aligns with your business objectives, providing a solid foundation that supports your company's evolution. And with that, I believe that is the end of the presentation. So we can turn it over to any questions that came in.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Jack. So just a couple here. So in one of the earlier slides, you mentioned about the need to be conducting security training, security awareness training for teams. What is the frequency to which you would like those should be offered? Is it something that needs to happen every month, every quarter? Like just any best practices you have around that?
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to evaluating the cadence, there's a couple things to consider. You'll have potential compliance requirements that will institute or give you a recommendation as to how often you should be conducting that training. And generally, it's at least once annually. If we were to look at some common frameworks like SOC 2, they suggest once annually, or that's what the control is. What we would recommend instead, or what I would recommend, is to implement a more frequent cadence. And nowadays, there's really great solutions to make this palatable. We don't want to run team members through hour-long trainings every month. That might not be the best use of their time, but we certainly want to make sure that cybersecurity is a topic that they're focusing on a regular basis. So we'd recommend establishing IT security training at an onboarding event. So whenever a new team member comes on board, it's important to run through that curriculum and have an established curriculum that they can review and become comfortable with, that will really set the stage for how they operate and handle business data throughout their time at the organization. But thereafter, it's important to have those little nudges. There are solutions that allow you to do like weekly micro trainings that are anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, or you can conduct monthly short trainings that are again within that 10 to 15-minute window. And then more robust semi-annual trainings where you're going through a very similar list of topics and curriculum that you would at the onboarding event. It's totally flexible, but recommendation would be to gauge where your team's at, determine if they really could benefit from additional training, especially as you start to round out the team and your departments grow. You're likely going to lose some of those, or you'll lose the notion of having a team of really technically adept individuals as you start to expand outside of generally what is product and operations oriented.
Gotcha. Definitely something that, as you noted earlier, is really important. We know that can be a big vulnerability point. So I think that cadence that you suggested is a good one. Another question for you, and really last question for you, I think around the security frameworks that you were talking about. Are there compliance frameworks that are more common for certain verticals that they'll need to pay attention to? You mentioned HIPAA, for example. Obviously, I think that's pretty common for anyone in the healthcare space. But are there other frameworks that we see are more common, depending on whatever vertical someone might be in?
Yeah, absolutely. So common ones that we deal with, Interlace works with a lot of startups that are in the tech industry. Within that, especially if you're creating some sort of software where you're processing client data, you have PII or personally identifiable information. The general security framework that the industry really conforms around is SOC 2 compliance. And to go beyond that, there's another solution or another compliance framework called ISO. Um, Often it's the ISO 27001 framework that really plays well with SOC 2. There's a lot of overlap in the controls. So with tech, SOC 2 and ISO 27001, with health tech or modern healthcare businesses, it's going to be HIPAA, absolutely. And then there might be an evolution beyond that where you want to achieve something called high trust, which is an evolvement of the HIPAA controls and really a much more robust framework to abide by. For government contractors or for those that do work with the DoD, NIST and CMMC are going to be those insurance requirements that you look for down the road. And for those in financial compliance, you're going to be looking at FINRA or SOX if you plan on being a publicly traded company. So that's just to name a few, along with some common industries that we tend to support. But as I mentioned, there are dozens of them out there. So for what it's worth, do some research, align with the common best practices for your industry. If you have any questions, anyone in the audience around the specific compliance frameworks that may confront them, you're welcome to shoot us a note. We're happy to provide you with some insight and point in the right direction to ensure you have the appropriate resources to confront and really achieve those compliance frameworks.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jack. And thank you everyone for joining today. I know we said this earlier, but we will get this out to you. We'll email this out along with a recording from today. And please feel free to engage and reach out to us via LinkedIn. This is Jack's LinkedIn profile here at the bottom here. You can also follow along with us on our Interlace page as well. We tend to share topics and sort of some tips and tricks, as we go along as well. So anyway, please feel free to reach out. We're always here to help. Thank you so much, and we appreciate you joining today.
Thanks, everyone.